Struggling to find what you need for your upcoming cosplay? Well, you're in the right spot. Hi, I'm Hannah. Thank you so much for coming to my channel where I talk all things costumes, cosplay, and events. And today we are talking about finding what you need for your cosplay at the antique store. Antique stores and thrift stores can both be treasure troves for unique, high-quality costume pieces. Antique stores can often have a very different stock from what you might typically find at a thrift store. The trade-off is that sometimes the inventory at an antique store can be much higher than a thrift store. Although in today's economy, maybe that's the reverse in your area. You never know. When my husband and I decided to attend the Mothman Festival this past fall, I knew I was going to cosplay as the Mothman, and he wanted to cosplay as a Vault Dweller from the Fallout 76 video game. He wanted to make his costume unique, so we went on a little scavenger hunt at a few of our local antique stores. If you're interested on our experience at the Mothman Festival, feel free to check out that video, which is linked below. We had a lot of fun, and you can watch more about it there. On our shopping scavenger hunt, we ended up checking a few places before we ultimately made a purchase. We were looking at what they had, what we needed, and different price points. So we ended up with a unique look to help him stand out among the crowd, and he actually received a lot of compliments at the festival, which was really nice to hear. Without further ado, here are 5 tips to finding your next cosplay piece at the antique store. The biggest tip, number 1, go in with a loose concept, not the final vision of what you're necessarily looking for. These stores can be unpredictable. You may not find the exact item you want, but you'll often discover something even better, right? So you can potentially think in themes like Victorian adventurer, steampunk pilot, fantasy noble, instead of a specific character. And bring reference images on your phone for color palettes or silhouette ideas. This worked really well for the Vault Dweller because he's not trying to look like a specific person within the Fallout game, but we knew we wanted elements for that time period. We ended up making a little metal pauldron and a thigh guard out of license plates. But the tricky part was we wanted West Virginia plates from the 50s or 60s, which was a little difficult to find. So we ended up finding one West Virginia that was kind of in a similar time period, and we got an Ohio plate from 76, which plays into the Fallout 76, right? Tip number 2 is look for silhouettes and textures, not perfection. You can transform almost anything with a little alteration and imagination. Focus on the shape of your garment, such as long coats, corsets, vests, skirts, hats that might fit the right era or vibe. You can also look at textures in fabrics like lace, brocade, leather, or velvet. Those specifically can be difficult to replicate cheaply elsewhere. Specifically, if you are looking to make some sort of leather craft, buying an old leather vest, leather belt, leather jacket, and repurposing that leather is a great way to upcycle, and you're likely not going to have to pay very much for it versus if you were to go buy a new piece of leather, make it into what you want, and then distress it, right? Tip number 3, repurpose and modify creatively. A lot of these items you'll find in these stores can be easily reimagined. So maybe you find a walking cane or a hiking stick, anything like that. That could become a wizard's staff or maybe a detective's accessory, right? Jewelry can be dismantled for costume embellishments or prop accents. I cannot tell you the amount of mid-2000s jewelry I will find at any antique store, even though that's not necessarily antique. A lot of antique stores are flooded with that 90s, 2000s jewelry, especially the bigger statement necklaces that aren't really popular anymore. Everywhere. They're everywhere. And similarly to how I mentioned leather before, if you find leather belts and or buckles and buttons that you can reuse for armor, straps, or holsters. So looking for those special things that, again, if you were to buy brand new at normal price, would be much more expensive. Tip number 4, age, dye, or distress items for authenticity. If something looks too pristine or too modern, you can weather it. You can use tea or fabric dye to give clothing a vintage or fantasy tint. You can also lightly sand or paint props to make them look aged, and you can mix modern pieces with antique ones to blend practicality with style. This is something I'll often do. This is not a cosplay, this is just for me to wear as a person. I bought a skirt at an antique store not too long ago. I loved the pattern of it. It was floral, but the main color of it was purple, and it was a little too bright for me. So I actually went in with some darker fabric dye and toned down the entire skirt, but preserved that nice floral pattern underneath. So if you see something that looks super, super close, but it's not quite right, there's often some things you can do to make it fit the thing that you're looking for. Number 5, negotiate and explore multiple stores. Antique prices can vary widely. Don't be afraid to ask for deals, especially if you're buying multiple pieces. Now, negotiating prices is not something that I typically have a lot of experience with. Usually when I'm going and finding, I'm looking for one thing, so I don't usually go in and buy a whole bunch of stuff at an antique store. But if you're at maybe like an antique mall where there's a bunch of different stalls, it might be worth it to ask the person at that stall if they would be willing to make a deal. But don't get offended and upset and cause a fuss if they say no. The worst thing they can say is no, and you can say, okay, I understand, thank you. But the biggest thing is to look at multiple stores. It can be a little exhausting to run around to a lot of different stores, but again, that's why I recommend an antique mall where they have a bunch of different vendors. There's usually more things you can look at in one spot instead of driving all over town. I'd also recommend checking consignment shops, flea markets, and estate sales. They often carry similar treasures for less, or even eBay or Facebook Marketplace, although beware, Facebook Marketplace is kind of the Wild West of the internet. I do really love going to estate sales though. I don't always find things, but when I do, they're pretty great, such as this little painting up here. I will also say this is better for like a longer term project to build your cosplay gradually as you find new pieces, right? So maybe you need a costume tomorrow. It's probably not going to be the most time effective for you to go around and look at all of these different antique stores and then alter a bunch of things to create a costume. If you're like, I know I'm going to go do something in a couple weeks, maybe this day I'll go check here, this day I'll go check here, etc. Specifically for this Fallout 76 costume, we ended up buying the jumpsuit and tank top off of Amazon, and I will have those links in the description below. And my husband weathered them to give them more of a distressed look. He also had this Pip-Boy accessory, this big unit that is on his arm. He actually made that himself back during the pandemic, so he already had that accessory ready to go. I'm sure you could create something similar using scrap metal, tools, and such that you can find at the antique store. Had we planned this look out a little bit more, I think we probably could have found a jumpsuit. Maybe not necessarily the right color, but we could have done some dye work to make it work. Anyway, that is kind of how we made his Fallout 76 cosplay and some tips for your next adventure to the antique store. That brings me to the end of this video. Next time you are needing something that is a little more difficult to find, don't be afraid to set out to your local antique store or antique mall. You'll find some amazing treasures. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or even subscribing or sharing this video with a friend. It really helps support this channel through the algorithm, and I'll love you forever. Reminder that you can also find me on Instagram and TikTok at _Hannah_dreaming on both platforms. And I have an Amazon storefront with all sorts of goodies linked in my description box below. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!